Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is anti-Semitism, a new, old, ugly anti-Semitism. We have already thought out loud about certain elements of anti-Semitism, especially the history of anti-Semitism and the different types of anti-Semitism. But today I want to focus on the current trends of anti-Semitism. The world is a different place because of this new wave of anti-Semitism. The Western world has taken a giant step backwards. For me, the summer conflict between Israel and Gaza was transformative. It clarified something. I was under the impression that anti-Semitism was a thing of the past. I was wrong. It only lay dormant. Now, after what I witnessed in the press and in conversations over the summer, it is clear that anti-Semitism is alive and well in the Western world. Recently in New York City, a Brooklyn 49-year-old man named Calvin Peters walked into a synagogue just after 1 a.m. He returned a few minutes later with a large knife shouting, "Kill the Jew." And he stabbed a 20-year-old Israeli student named Levi Rosenblatt. The police shot and killed Peters, a man with a knife, stabbing Jews in the synagogue and shouting about killing Jews. This is pretty straightforward. Some will say that it's not anti-Semitism or terror. You decide. Just the other day in Moscow, a Jewish student was brutally beaten just outside of his yeshiva, his school. Literally, he was 20 yards from the entrance of his school. 3 attackers armed with brass knuckles beat him in the head and caused serious damage. During the beating, they shouted terrible anti-Semitic slurs. The attackers took no money. All they wanted was to attack an identifiable Jew, a Jew who looked like a Jew. Add to this 2 more cases of blatant and evil anti-Semitism that took place recently. A Jewish man in Antwerp was stabbed, and a Jewish woman was raped near Paris in her home in a home invasion, and their boyfriend was right there bound and beaten at the same time. All these attacks were all clearly anti-Semitic. What is essential to understand is that Jews are feeling threatened all over the world, and even in Western countries that were once host to the rise of Western freedoms. Let's focus on France. France was the birthplace of modern political freedom. It was there that Jews were emancipated. France was the first nation to give all Jews total and complete equality. They were given total freedom as full citizens in the years 1790 and 1791. It was all a result of the French Revolution. Of course, there was a debate on the question, as there had to be, as to whether Jews should be granted complete freedom or not. It was all a part of that revolution: liberté, fraternité, and equalité. These powerful themes are to France what baseball, hot dogs, and Chevrolet are to America. Jews became the example par excellence during the revolution for the idea of freedom. The revolutionary forces and thinkers held up the Jews as the ultimate example. They asked, how can we profess freedom and not emancipate the Jews? They said, the emancipation then came in 2 completely different stages. The first, the more secular and assimilated Jews of France were emancipated in 1790. And then after that, those Jews who were less assimilated and looked more stereotypically Jewish were emancipated in 1791. Now let's focus on France today. Recently, there was a large protest against this rise of racism and anti-Semitism, really concerning that awful rape and home invasion that I spoke about earlier. It took place in the Paris suburb. The Interior Minister attended and spoke about the need to fight anti-Semitism and racism with all the powers and all the strength that France has. Here is a news report about the protests. France's government has pledged more action to fight anti-Semitism after an attack on a couple that revived worries about rising numbers of incidents targeting Jews in the country. Several hundred people demonstrated Sunday in the Paris suburb of Créteil, where the attack took place last Monday, to draw attention to what France's leading Jewish organization says is a nearly doubling of anti-Semitic incidents this year compared to 2013. It continues the report. Speaking during the rally, Interior Minister Bernard Cazeneuve vowed to make a fight against anti-Semitism a national cause by getting all bodies concerned involved. He told those present that France will, quote, defend you with all its strength because without you, it would no longer be the Republic. Speaking at the same rally, Roger Zuckerman, the head of France's main Jewish organization, the CRIF, said, quote, Jews feel in danger. Some are already leaving France, unquote. He called on the government to do more to address the, quote, problem of we feel that something has changed and it's no longer just graffiti or minor incidents. These are death threats against the Jewish community. It cannot go on like this. Cazeneuve said anti-Semitic acts and the threats have more than doubled in the past 10 months and called for the authorities to ensure that, quote, none of them goes unpunished, unquote. In what President François Hollande has described as an unbearable attack, assailants stormed that flat of a young couple, raping the woman and stealing jewelry and bank cards. And this is what's interesting. The report then explains how they did it. According to the male victim, the attackers told them that they had not chosen the place by random. It wasn't a simple home invasion, in other words. Quote, we know that your brother is the manager of a big clothing chain. We know he has a cash till, one said to them. According to the man who was interviewed on French television, in any case, you Jews have money, the assailant added, according to the victim. This was not a petty crime, but a cowardly, vile, and anti-Semitic act, said the minister. Behind this crime, quote, this is an evil that is eating away at the Republic, which needs to be fought at all costs. Speaking later on French television, Prime Minister Manuel Valls said that he was, quote, surprised that there were not more demonstrations on the streets against anti-Semitism and racism. Quote, what happened in Créteil, this abominable crime, this violence, the rape of a young woman, the attack on the family because they are Jewish, that's not France, unquote, stressed Valls. One has to realize that France is home to some 500 to 600,000 Jews, the third largest Jewish community population in the entire world, right after Israel and the United States. But violent incidents like the murders of the 3 children and the rabbi by Islamist militants, terrorists, in 2012, and clashes at pro-Palestinian rallies in Paris have disturbed some of the Jewish community. Tensions over the recent Gaza conflict spilled out into the streets in July, with looters destroying Jewish businesses, shouting anti-Semitic slogans, and attacking synagogues. The number of French Jews who have moved to Israel in the first 10 months of 2014 has more than doubled compared to last year. A leading Jewish agency source said last week, and attributed the spike to sluggish economy and the rise of anti-Semitic sentiment. This is one bone-chilling report. Coming up next, Points of View. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is a column in the New York Times, but from the online edition. There are things that are online that you don't find in the print, and it's important to see. They are exceptional pieces that lift the paper into a whole new type of media. They need to compete online. It's not just reprinting what they've got in the print edition. I'm speaking about a section called Room for Debate. It launched in March of 2009, and here's the format. The editors of the section create an idea. Then they invite people, experts, and people who are unabashedly taking sides with an unmistakable bias to prepare their comments. And then there's feedback back and forth. Today I want to discuss the room for debate that the New York Times posted on December 8th, 2014. It's entitled, "If Israel Turns to the Right, Where Will It End Up?" The editors lead by setting the stage with the following paragraph. Quote, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ousted the two most prominent centrist ministers from his government. With new elections slated for March, he appears ready to form a government of rightist allies and religious parties. Does the prospect of a purely rightist government show how much Israel has changed? Could the coming elections transform Israel's future, its place in the world, and chances for peace? Now, this is a valid and important set of questions. It's interested in what people are thinking, not just about the elections, but about the future of the entire relationship between Israel and the world, based on what appears to be a move to the right in Israel. First up is an article by Jonathan Schanzer. Remember, these are short pieces. Schanzer is a former terrorism finance analyst at the U.S. Department of Treasury. He is currently the Vice President for Research at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. His comments are entitled, "Neither Challenges nor Response Will Change." He begins by saying that these elections will not actually change anything. Quote, Israel's most significant challenges will not go away, regardless of who holds office in Jerusalem. The elections are unlikely to change Israel's security policies, unquote. Schanzer concludes by asserting, some might argue that a more moderate prime minister might help reset relations with Israel's allies. These are the same people who argue that Netanyahu's right-wing policies have been a contributing factor to Israel's security challenges. But even if Netanyahu is unseated, which is extremely unlikely, it will soon become clear that Israel's fight for survival looks roughly the same under any leadership. It's a tough neighborhood, unquote. Schanzer is enormously realistic. The assessment of both Israel and the region, the unwritten huge point that's shouting in the reader's face is saying the following. All those hoping for change are not truly seeing the factors on the ground and the forces at play. Change is unlikely. The status quo will prevail. The next comment is by Diana Boutou. Now, Diana was the former legal advisor to the Palestinian Liberation Organization's chairman, Mahmoud Abbas. The Palestinian negotiators, Diana, is now the policy advisor to Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. Her piece is called, "There Are No Centrists in Israel." So you get my point. In other words, they took one side, now they're taking someone from the other side. She begins by saying that with each election, we look to the centrists to help the situation. Quote, but make no mistake, she says, there are no centrists in Israel. Zionist parties support Israel's continued military occupation, the construction and expansion of Israeli colonies, the attacks on and the siege of the Gaza Strip, and most important, the denial of freedom and equality to Palestinians. And then she gives an example. For example, Tzipi Livni, the justice minister, fired by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has repeatedly voted against Knesset bills seeking to enshrine equality in Israeli laws. In other countries, these politicians would be considered right-wing extremists, not centrists. I have to read her entire conclusion because it is so telling of her point of view and the point of view of her greater community. Boutou concludes with a biting critique of Israel. She writes, quote, Israel's perpetual rightward shift reflects the hubris of America's spoiled child. Every elected American official pampers and lavishes support for Israel, even as Israel's actions defy U.S. interests and presidential statements. The world's unwillingness to halt Israel's illegal behavior cements a mindset that illegality is permissible. No matter what the composition of the next Israeli government, the world must move to hold Israel accountable The world must make clear that the era of denying the rights, freedoms, and dignity of Palestinians is over. The international community must now impose sanctions on Israel for its continued illegal activity and not hide behind a farcical peace process in the belief that this will lead to Palestinian freedom. It is nonsensical that Palestinians, occupied and stateless, must negotiate their freedom with their occupier and oppressor. It is the role of the international community to make known that it will not tolerate colonialism in the 21st century. If the world fails to do so, it should not be surprised when Palestinians lash out against their oppressor, just as other oppressed communities have done around the world. That was a powerful statement by her, sometimes totally mistaken, but that's the Palestinian point of view. The next contributor is a character named David Newman. Now, Newman is the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at Ben-Gurion University and holds the university chair in geopolitics. Newman supports the centrists and sees great hope in their rise to power. He begins his piece, which is called "An Alternative Can Save Israel," by writing the following. Now that Netanyahu has decided to divest himself of those few coalition partners who still believe in Israel as a democratic state, is there sufficient support amongst the public who have become increasingly apathetic of politics to bring a pro-peace center-left government to power? For this to happen, the left has got to join forces on the issues that unite them rather than, as is so common among left-wing parties throughout the world, to divide and fragment on the issues which divide them. Professor Newman concludes by saying that there is a real chance for the center-left to emerge out of this new election. He says, parties of the more radical left, such as Meretz, which has become lost in intra-ideological intellectualism and irrelevant to so many on the left, the Arab parties, and also the ultra-Orthodox parties, must look at the bigger picture and not get subsumed, as they tend to, by their complex sectoral issues. Change for them can only come about when a more enlightened, pro-peace and pro-human rights, for Jews as for Arabs, center-left coalition is elected to power. Now is not the time for intellectual debates. Now is the time to join together in an effort to change the public mood and vote in an alternative government for the future good of the State of Israel, unquote. If it's not obvious, Newman is a true centrist and articulates it in a very clear and composed fashion. Next up is Caroline Glick. Caroline Glick is the author of The Israeli Solution, the Israeli one-state peace plan. Now, the one-state peace plan is actually an idea which sort of suggests that the two-state solution is dead in the water. She's a senior contributing editor to the Jerusalem Post. She is the director of the Israeli Security Project at the David Horowitz Freedom Center in Los Angeles, and she begins with the following. If current polls bear out, Israel's next coalition government will be much like the one just dissolved. In part, this is because Prime Minister Netanyahu will in all likelihood lead the next government, and his priorities are unlikely to change. But it is also true that despite carping from the left, there is a broad consensus in Israel regarding what must be done in relation to security and foreign affairs issues. Caroline Glick is providing a true assessment, showing something very different from what you were hearing and seeing in the left-wing press. Glick concludes with the following. The pressures of terror and world politics have not changed, and neither have the sentiments of Israelis. So the government will be about the same. Quote, among other things, such events could involve the overthrow of the Hashemite regime in Jordan, the Iranian attack on Israel, a decision by Hezbollah to begin a new war from Lebanon, or a major assault from Syria. The constraints it operates under, both regionally and globally, are not of its making, and so its maneuver room is limited. At the same time, the Israeli public's preferences have not changed. So consequently, it is hard to imagine a radical change in the government policies after the next government is formed. This last thought is by a character named Max Blumenthal. Max Blumenthal is a senior writer for Alternet, and author of a text called Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. It is a smear against Israel. Blumenthal is a seriously problematic character. Last year, Blumenthal made the top 10 list, a list created by the Simon Wiesenthal Center for people who said the most anti-Semitic things. He has repeatedly criticized Israel and has been calling her JSIL, Jewish State of the Levant, making a parallel between ISIS or ISIL. It's pretty bold, pretty arrogant, and pretty obnoxious. Blumenthal's piece is entitled, "A Rightward Shift in Israel Would Reflect What's Always Been True." He writes, quote, "Catering to a rightward trending Israeli public that is fiercely opposed to a Palestinian state, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is advancing a Jewish state bill. In Netanyahu's words, the bill will provide national rights only for the Jewish people. Some versions of the bill would make Jewish tradition and the prophets of Israel sources of legal and judicial authority." He concludes saying that the right is moving away from democracy and democratic values, but at least they're being honest about it. And he outright calls Israel a racist state in the piece. He says, if a shift is underway in Israeli politics, it is primarily tonal. Israel's rightists intend to carry on the Zionist project as originally conceived, but without the pretense of democracy. In a way, their honesty is refreshing. The room for debate in the New York Times brought out some very important points of view. Some were descriptive, and some were simply wrong. But the civil nature of the debate is very, very important. I will say that none of the respondents actually answered all of the questions laid out. I suppose that's okay. There is always room for debate, and there will be times to discuss these issues in the future. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. The cartoon up right now is by Tom Towles. Towles won the Pulitzer Prize in 1990 for editorial cartooning. He used to draw for the Buffalo papers, the Courier Express, and the Buffalo News, but in 2002 he accepted the position at the Washington Post. He has been there ever since. Towles drew a Sunday comic strip entitled Curious Avenue about little kids. He started performing in a rock band in D.C. in 2008 and plays drums in a band composed of a lot of D.C. insiders. This cartoon is a wonderful play on words. Uncle Sam is in the middle of a globe, presumably the Middle East, but the globe actually reads Muddle East. And Uncle Sam is turning in every direction, every which, and is confused. In the background, things are burning and jet fighters are dropping bombs. Uncle Sam starts muttering, and here's a series of plays on words. The enemy of my frenemy is the frenemy of my former friend, and the allyversary of our partner in crime, who is retraining to recover the stolen arms we supplied to. This is very funny, especially given where the weapons have gone. ISIS has stolen and taken and even been delivered weapons from the United States. They are following the weapons, and Toll is making fun and a pun of Machiavelli's great line, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. I want to think out loud with you now. The other day in Copenhagen, a Danish court ruled that inciting terror included statements on Facebook accounts. A Danish bookseller, originally from Morocco, named San Mansour, posted, quote, "We are all terrorists, and we are proud," unquote. Mansour and his lawyer argued that it was free speech in a free country, and they actually drew the parallel to the Danish cartoonist that lampooned the Prophet Muhammad. There are several huge issues at hand. One might expect this reaction from the bookseller, but from the lawyer should know better. Lampooning a historical figure, regardless of how venerated, is a clear issue of free speech. The fact that people were insulted by the cartoon and the cartoons and the cartoonist does not violate the issue of free speech. Being insulted is not one of the rules used to limit free speech. That is just disrespect and sometimes poor taste. However, preaching hatred and inciting violence, that needs to be reined in by the law. So the Danish court is correct. There is some latitude here on the issue, and I understand that. The court could have ruled that it was freedom of speech simply because Mansour was online and not saying it in person. So he was siding with the terrorists, though. But given the environment in Europe at this very moment, the court felt that they had to stem the tide of public affinity with terror. So the court made a clear connection between public affinity and support of terror, and terror itself. I predict that this will be the direction of future courts as they take regarding terror in all Western democracies. Publicly supporting acts of terrorism is a form of incitement to terror. Publicly supporting terror justifies the destructive acts of terror, and that should never be condoned or allowed. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. It's the Chanukah season. The central theme about Chanukah is, of course, religious freedom. When the Jews, in about the year 165 BCE, revolted against the Syrian Greeks. But the real tension was actually between Jew and Jew. In reality, the major conflict of Chanukah was Jew against Jew. Actually, in Hebrew, a new word was created at that very time to describe the conflict. The word was lehityavein, to Hellenize, to become like a Greek. Today, we would use the word assimilate. The substance of the conflict between assimilationist Jews, who embraced Greek culture, and the self-termed Hasidim, who were fighting to preserve Judaism. The story is not about gifts and about presents, but a struggle about the future of the Jewish people, something to think about. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV on JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.